Hello, it is Sunday, December 15th. Can't believe it's going to be 2025 soon. This is a quick video. This is going to be a Patreon exclusive. I hope you enjoy these. If you find value, let me know. I will do more of them when I get a chance. Just wanted to get this one out there while the coffee is still coursing through my veins. Um, just I guess some quick things to deal with. Am I'm still working on this analysis of 3D Workers Island. I am kind of I'm in the editing process. I'm feeling better about it now than I did a few days ago. Um, but it still needs to be cleaned up and tightened up, and it's going to take quite some time to produce. It's getting pretty long. I'm gonna have to uh, cut it up into chunks when I'm in the recording process, and yeah, I don't know when it's gonna be out. It's gonna take a while, so I'll keep producing these uh, these little videos and whatnot to sort of keep things moving along, keep the momentum while I'm working on this bigger project. I think that's a good workflow for me at this point. Yeah, so this video is about um, a couple of things. It's about pedantry, concern trolling, and tone policing. Three of my least favorite things on the internet. Um, and so there is a dual nature to this video. Um, One is it's going to be me venting about a few things. But two, I hope it's useful to you to maybe help understand in your own life um, when someone is being pedantic or concern trolling or trying to tone police you in a way that is not productive, when to recognize that and perhaps what to do about it. Obviously, it depends on the context, and I don't want to generalize too much, but um, and also when to identify when you yourself are being pedantic or concern trolling or tone policing, because we these are very human things. We all do it. We all do it from time to time, and they are, I think, to some degree, defense mechanisms when we don't want to deal with something that is uncomfortable or something we're trying to avoid for whatever psychological reason, yeah, so I mean, let's get into it. Pedantry on the internet is, uh, you know, uh, pedants are a dime a dozen. So what is pedantry really? Um, it's sort of the art of focusing on irrelevant minutia, uh, often in an effort to derail or dominate a conversation. Um, so you know, uh, it's that insidious little instinct that sort of prioritizes scoring internet points over seeking clarity. So you will often see this on Reddit. Reddit is the site of pedantry, in my view, um, and it's rewarded. You know, Reddit karma is essentially uh, a sort of direct function of how pedantic somebody is. I've found. um, that's not always the case, but the person who interrupts a nuanced argument to sort of correct your grammar or nitpick a trivial detail, um, these people, when they do this, they are signaling to you that they are not interested in engaging with your ideas. They're interested in trying to prove you wrong. Um, even if they miss the forest for the trees. And the real problem with pedantry isn't that it's annoying, even though it is. It is very annoying. It is one of my biggest pet peeves. But um, the real problem is that it's corrosive uh, to the discourse. It reduces a discussion to a sort of tedious sparring match over irrelevant details. Now, I'm all for a sparring match, but it needs to be over things that matter, right? Um, pedants will sort of leave the real issue untouched, and um, you have to know how to recognize it when it shows up, you know, because you don't want to get derailed. The first thing to understand is that pedantry is it's rarely about the topic being discussed. It's more about power. Um, so pedants will sort of latch onto details not because they matter, but because those details offer a sort of opportunity for them to assert control over the discourse. So, um, you know, and these things are nuanced because really, when you have a sort of meta discussion about arguments in general, um, it can go in any number of ways. And I will say, oftentimes there is an open contested territory with respect to what is really important and what do you value, right? So that is an open question from time to time, but um, an internet pedant will not really grapple with that either. They will sort of oftentimes it will not be clear based on their argumentation or counter argumentation. It will not be clear what it is they're actually what it is they actually value or what they think is the case, and that is a pretty good, a surefire way to spot an internet pedant. Um, when they are sort of nitpicking details about what you have put out there, um, without actually asserting a cohesive counter argument instead they just choose to nitpick things that are not actually material to what you are saying, the general thrust of what you're trying to say. So I'll give you an example of this, and it is um, it is a great example of how sometimes people can dress up their comment in a way that it seems as though they're well-intentioned individuals who are simply asking questions, right? Um, but if you actually get to the core of like what they're actually saying, it's like it's not it's not particularly helpful. Um, so I'll give you an example, and it's in response to my my latest video, my latest public video, which is about the title is Moral Purity is Killing Art. And so in that video, I sought out to kind of use three different case studies uh, throughout modern history um, to demonstrate how um, viewing art primarily through a moral lens as a sort of checklist of potentially progressive or problematic elements, why this is a shallow way of engaging with art and why it's corrosive and why at its core it's a sort of conservative impulse because it exhibits a sort of discomfort with ambiguity, and some of the best art is inherently ambiguous, right? Like Petscop's a great example of that. Um, so this kind of discomfort with ambiguity or contradiction is a fundamentally conservative impulse because it is a sort of obsessive desire to control things. Um, and so I use sort of three case studies to kind of break that down, right? I talked about the early progressive movement in the United States and Jane Addams, and the way she kind of talked about art as a sort of a way to uplift the masses, a sort of moral example of how to uplift the masses, right? Um, and I talked about the Satanic Panic, right? Originating in the 1980s, quite some time later, right? But another American, a quintessentially American reaction, right? Um, the 80s and 90s, and how the conservatives' attempts to sort of censor certain TV shows they found to be subversive, or their problems with uh, metal music or Dungeons and Dragons. How this is it's quite similar in some ways to the way that progressives um, talk about art. You know, um, it's just sort of it's two sides of the same coin. The there is a sort of uh, core core sort of characterization or understanding that ambiguity or contradiction or things of this sort are uh, problematic in some way and should be stamped out. And I also talked about the third case study, which is Soviet realism, right? So, if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and check it out. But I think you, I think you generally understand what I'm saying. Um, like the central thesis, I suppose, is that these three historical uh, phenomena are sort of uh, the one thing that's consistent about them, despite all of the incidental historical circumstances, is this sort of um, authority, uh, which kind of views art fundamentally in a moral way. And this is a conservative impulse to try to control the discourse, right? Um, that's a sort of central thesis. And so I think that's pretty clear. I mean, it's a 30-minute video, so you would be forgiven for not fully grasping it, but um, you know, it certainly could have been a much longer video too. And this is what I'm sort of getting at here. So like one of these responses I received is, and I don't want to pick on this person too much, but I do want to use this as a sort of jumping off point to talk about uh, why pedantry is not helpful, and also connect it to this notion of concern trolling, right? Um, so let's see, where is the comment? Yeah, and this is I got this yesterday, so bear with me. It's quite a long comment, and this is a great example of someone who uh, it would seem they are engaging with the content of my video, when in reality they're not. So maybe I shouldn't. Uh, I shouldn't necessarily bias you right off the bat. Why don't we just read the comment and see what you think? So here we go. I'm sympathetic with what I take to be your intentions, but I'm afraid this is a very poor argument. I will just say, when someone does this, it's already a red flag. Because if I was making a bad argument, you could just show why. You wouldn't have to sort of telegraph it, right? So at best, this is bad writing, but at worst, you know, um, it's sort of overcompensating because I'm not actually making a bad argument. Um, so back to the comment. Throughout the video, you are again and again vague and ambiguous, so it's very hard to figure out exactly what you're trying to say. This is another thing, sort of like, well, um, because you did not provide enough details, it's difficult to really ascertain what you're trying to say. When I think, if you watch that video, I think it's pretty clear what I'm trying to say. Um, but this could be a disagreement over sensibilities or a disagreement over the type of rhetoric that I'm employing, right? Which is fundamentally a sort of an issue of sensibilities, right? So anyway, for the first half of the video, you focus on solely on progressivism, but the bounds of your claims about it remain unclear. You criticize two quotations from Jane Addams and David Foster Wallace, but don't provide enough evidence to say for certain whether or not they actually consistently believe the things you attributed to them, which is uh, not material to actually what I'm saying in the video. So this is a great example of pedantry, right? Because whether or not Jane Addams or David Foster Wallace consistently believed a certain thing, in this context, it would be um, that, well, for starters, the quote from Jane Addams was something to the effect of, and I quote, like her, she said, the chief characteristic of art is essentially to kind of alleviate the isolation of somebody's feelings of their particular emotional experience. I'm not quoting her directly, but she does say the chief characteristic of art. So she is asserting a sort of hierarchy in that statement, saying the chief characteristic, right? That implies a sort of system of moral values, and it strikes at the core of what I'm trying to criticize, right? Um, Whether or not she believed this consistently throughout her life is immaterial to my argument. And uh, coinciding with that, so I related it to a quote by David Foster Wallace, who said that the function of literature is to make people feel less alone. I'm a fan of David Foster Wallace. I enjoy his books, but I'm criticizing that particular sentiment. Um, Whether or not he believed this or exhibited this belief consistently throughout his life is immaterial to my argument, right? Um, so this is pedantry. Um, did they explicitly attack all forms of art that did not fulfill the positive moral function they advocated? That's not relevant to my argument. I have no idea, and I'm not sure you do either. Instead, you apparently just assume that's that's what they meant. But is it possible that art sometimes does have a function of moral reform without necessarily negating its other qualities? You never address the issue. And so, you see, this is another thing. Because I don't, because in this relatively short video I made, I don't formulate a cohesive and exhaustive theory of aesthetics. Therefore, my argument is invalid. This is pedantry. Learn to recognize it when you see it. Um, because this is, again, is not material to the argument that I am making, that I emphasize, that I think is pretty clear if you watch the video and actually listen to what I'm saying, which is, here are three historical examples in which in which authorities have historically exhibited this kind of conservative impulse to try to assert supposed moral uh, beliefs or presuppositions about how art should function onto the masses and how this is corrosive to society, right? Um, so because I have not articulated my own position on what I think art should do, actually, I think I do that rather consistently in the video, but even if I didn't, that's that is immaterial to the argument that I'm making, right? Um, okay, here's another part of this comment. When you do talk about what you think art is for, your words are not very consistent with one another, but you do seem to leave open the possibility that art can have a positive social function, that it can challenge fixed and unexamined ideas and thus contribute to social improvement. This is a very troublesome way to frame the argument, and this is not what I'm saying necessarily. Um, is it really so far from the progressivism you attacked earlier in the video? So I say in the video that good art is oftentimes contradictory. Good art is ambiguous. Good art can have a transformative function insofar as it critiques existing value systems, right? Uh, but that is a sort of negative critique function, not a positive uh, prescriptive function. You have to understand the difference. Surely you understand the difference, right? Um, so, yes, this is again an example of pedantry, I'm afraid to say. Um, let's see here. I don't want to pick on this person too much. And by the way, if you uh, do not pick on this person, do not harass them, do not, leave them alone. They just it's just somebody who left a comment on a video. I'm using it as a jumping off point for this discussion. I am sure they are a perfectly fine person. IRL, we just happen to disagree about this particular issue. So moving on. Um, they say you discuss the conservative approach to art by focusing solely on the Satanic Panic, as if that's when conservative attitudes towards art first came into existence. But surely you know that art, and philosophies of art, existed before the 20th century. Why don't you mention them? Why doesn't it occur to you that the relationship between art and morals has been a topic of reflection since at least Plato and Aristotle? uh, why are you unable to acknowledge that the moral role of art was taken for granted for most of history? The fact that art before the 20th century usually had an explicit moral function is surely significant, isn't it? Do you see this sleight of hand occurring here in the rhetoric? So I made a 30-minute video and I talked about three historical examples, right? By the way, that's a heck of a lot more than most people do when they talk about this issue. Um, so they seem to be saying that because I don't sufficiently historicize the issue, that's pretty rich. Uh, that because I don't talk about the history of moral perspectives on art going back to fucking Plato, that this negates my point, but it doesn't. And so this is pedantry. Do you see why like someone can frame their counter argument to what you're saying in a way that seems quite substantive because they're talking about Plato, they're talking about how oh, you talked about this as though it existed in a vacuum, right? Um, there are more charitable versions of each of these statements, but when they are contextualized in this way, it's pedantry, right? Because it doesn't actually negate my counter argument. It, or it doesn't actually negate the central argument that I'm trying to make, which is again that this conservative impulse has been observed throughout history and is corrosive, right? So if we were to analyze moral perspectives on art, going back to Plato, I think that's an entirely worthwhile exercise. It is also the case that I have a limited amount of fucking time in my life, and maybe that's not a priority for me, you know? Um, so learn to identify pedantry and this type of concern trolling because um, when you are able to do so, you will find you will find it everywhere, and you will be able to cut through the bullshit, and it will actually save you time. So I understand I'm about 25 minutes into this video, and uh, like this is taking a while to kind of unpack, but I believe in my heart of hearts that when you're able to identify this, um, it will it will provide a sense of clarity. Um, yeah. Um, so let's proceed because I think we can pick this apart even further, and I can show you how certain very intelligent people, if they're uncomfortable with what you're saying, they will provide all manner of coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms to try to evade what you're saying instead of actually addressing it. And this is at the heart of what pedantry is. Um, and so you can identify when an intelligent person is being pedantic. Um, and this is a great example of that. This comment here, because this person is clearly very smart. Um, and nonetheless they're being pedantic. An example of a stupid person being pedantic would be correcting your grammar or correcting the way you pronounce something. Um, that sort of thing is very low effort pedantry, and that's not even worth talking about, is it? Um, but yeah. Um, Finally, I am unable to figure out what exactly inspired this rant. So characterizing my video as a rant, as opposed to uh, a more productive uh, you know description of it would be I am I'm making an argument. I used historical examples to support my argument, so I don't quite understand why you would call it a rant. Um, Back to the comment. You seem to have a problem with certain moralistic or progressive responses to art on social media, but you don't provide any specifics. So who knows what you're really upset about? Strangely, you don't mention any current far-right attacks on art or the fascist philosophy of art that is currently seeing a resurgence in popularity. Do you approve of them? It doesn't seem likely, but you don't say. So we talked a lot about pedantry. Now we're going to talk about concern trolling. Um, I would say this is a great example of concern trolling. So because I don't provide uh, concrete examples of what it is I'm talking about, therefore, and the reason I did that is because I wanted it to be an open-ended sort of conversation. I want it to be I want the purpose of my video is to try to get people thinking about are they doing this perhaps? Are they trying to assert their sense of morality onto a work of art and sort of prejudge it without actually engaging with it in a more meaningful way, you know? So the issue is if I provide examples up front, it's going to actually be reductive. It's going to limit your perspective uh, to make you think that I'm only talking about these specific examples, when in reality, I want this to be more open. and I want you to actually think about how you're engaging with art and um, you know, that sort of thing, right? Um, but of course, this invites this specific type of concern trolling because you can insinuate that I'm one of these reactionary fuckwads who uh, who sort of thinks it's okay to um, I don't know. Um, I'm trying to think of an example of this, but this person alludes to it pretty descriptively. Far right attacks on art, um, fascist philosophy of art. The this is we can quibble about whether there's actually a resurgence of the fascist philosophy of art. I am somewhat skeptical of that. I think it's always kind of been uh, the nascent sort of or the it's always been the sort of ambient background noise of American pop culture, but that perhaps that is the Adorno in me speaking. I don't necessarily think we're experiencing a resurgence of that. I think in fact the Satanic Panic is a great example of that. But let's be clear. I mean, what I think of reactionary perspectives on art, especially the more popular, the things that get more traction on YouTube. I think these people are beneath contempt. I think they are. Uh, I think of them what Nietzsche thought of anti-Semites. How about that? Uh, does that give you enough context? Um, um, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, no, just like just to give you an example, like these people who create lists of art that is too woke, too quote unquote woke, and therefore these are things to steer away from. Well, this is a perfect instance of what I'm talking about actually, which is viewing art fundamentally through a moral lens. The issue with the reactionaries is they've just taken that and instead of virtue signaling like the progressives, they are vice signaling. They are doing the opposite. But that is this is two sides of the same coin. This is the shallow engagement with art. This is a great example of it, right? Um, so maybe that is a fair critique. Maybe I should have mentioned that because it is relevant to what I am. It's relevant to my general argument, which is that this is a fundamentally conservative impulse to try to assert a moral rubric onto what art should be, some supposed notion of what art should be, right? Um, okay, and now here's the last part of their comment. In any case, if you're upset about progressives on social media, this is not like um, this is not my real concern. I don't think. I used I vaguely alluded to Letterboxd in my video um, as a sort of jumping off point, but this is not really my concern is not progressives on social media. My concern is a more general thing about how about moral prescriptivism with respect to how art should function, right? But anyway, here's a comment. In any case, if you're upset about progressives on social media, I would just say there are a few things to keep in mind. One, a large number of these people are children. Valid, also not material to my argument. Two, a large number of these people are completely uneducated. Uh, See, this is where you lose me, because I think that's pretty condescending, right? Um, I think there are plenty of quote unquote uneducated people who are actually a lot more uh, have a lot more sophisticated views on movies and music and television than a lot of supposedly educated people. But that's just me. But back to the comment. Three, and so these are a few things to keep in mind from their perspective. Three, social media algorithms are designed to actively promote rage and stupidity. Certainly true. Four, very few of these people have read Jane Addams or even heard of her. That's not material to my argument, sorry to say. So again, I'm just trying to show you how failing to engage with the central thesis of somebody's argument leaves you open to this pedantic line of reasoning. Um, Whether or not people have heard of Jane Addams or subscribe to her particular philosophy is immaterial to my argument. That's just an Jane Addams is just a historical example of the thing I'm criticizing. I'm not saying that uh, it she is particularly influential in pop culture, although she may be in ways that you don't fully grapple with here. But that's besides the point. Back to the comment. Five, the assumption that art must have a positive moral message is almost universal in history. It takes experience and education to grow beyond it. This is where you sort of activate. You activate me. This is where this is where I become enraged because uh again, as alluded to earlier, like so they said number two, a large number of these people are completely uneducated. And it's like I just said like I think I think supposedly uneducated people have some pretty nuanced views that you might be surprising to supposedly educated people. And I think a lot of supposedly educated people, people who have gotten bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and perhaps even doctorates, are some of the most pedantic, moralistic people out there. And to sort of frame this as though this moral prescriptivism with respect to art is coming from the uh, uneducated masses? I don't think so. I I think the so-called uneducated masses are actually more open to a lot of ostensibly problematic things than um, than the educated elite, right? So this is my issue. Like, I guess I'm getting bogged down, and this is what pedantic people will do to you. You will get bogged down in um, tangential things that are not really material to the central issue that you were trying to discuss in the first place. Um, so again, I don't want you to pick on that person. I'm sure they're a perfectly fine person, but this is an example of how someone can come across as quite reasonable and just asking questions and sort of ostensibly trying to be productive, right? Um, when in reality, they're not grappling with the fundamental issue at hand, and uh, and ultimately that can be a quite a distraction. Um, and it's not so much that it's not it's not significant insofar as like you need to address every single internet pedant out there that like comments on something you were trying to say, right? The more salient thing to kind of keep in mind here is that once you recognize this type of pedantry, once you're able to recognize it, um, you will find that is very commonplace. Um, and Um, I guess what I would say here is like you'll find that um, you'll realize how much of the supposed authority figures around you, whether they're parents or your boss or your manager or political leaders, um, they rely on these tactics in order to control you. Um, so don't shy away from this realization. Um, and in fact, you should challenge it. Um, you should refuse to let pedantry set the terms of the conversation, and you should demand engagement with big ideas, um, and messy, uncomfortable truths, right? Because at the end of the day, the real antidote, um, to pedantry is focus, a proper sort of orientation towards issues that matter to you. Um, so in this video, I have taught, we've sort of had a meta discussion about arguments in general, and using this one comment as a sort of case study, right? But um, I have not told you what you should value per se, other than to say that you shouldn't allow yourself to get distracted by internet pedants. What you value is up to you. And we can have that's a separate conversation, isn't it? Um, yeah. Um, don't get lost in don't get bogged down in nitpicking and quibbling. Um, and try to recognize when someone is attempting to control the terms of the discourse, attempting to control the scope of the discourse, right? So I hope this video was helpful to you. Um, I know I went on. I, this is a bit longer than I had initially intended for it to be, but I feel strongly about this. Um, And if you think I'm being unreasonable, feel free to let me know. I won't hold it against you. Um, if you think that, if you disagree with my perspective on moral prescriptivism, that's totally fine as well, right? Like, but you have to address the core of what I'm saying, you know, if you really want to combat that.